listening to Range Minded from Independence Indoor Shooting. Before we get started, we want to thank you for liking the brand new Range Minded Podcast Facebook page and leaving us some feedback while you're there. If you haven't yet, that's okay. Just make sure you search for us on Facebook under Range Minded Podcast. This is episode 33, where we go back to some basics in education about firearms, specifically about the 8 steps in the cycle of operation. We go over each step in detail, plus why it's important to know this cycle so you can better understand your firearm, diagnose issues, and even become a better shooter. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy Range Minded episode number 33, the 8 steps in the cycle of operation. Hello and welcome to Range Minded from Independence Indoor Shooting, episode number 33.
And that's it? Just 33?
Just 33. Wow.
It feels like we've done this at least 35 times.
No, 33. Well, technically 34 times, but this is episode 33 because we started on 0.
All the banter we have beforehand.
And we had like 1.5, right?
Yeah, we had a 2-parter. That's what it really should have been.
Yeah.
We don't subscribe to conventional numbering systems here at Range Minded, but Steve Zimmerman...
Not even the Dewey Decimal System.
Steve Zimmerman live from Idaho Falls. And Ricky Kasner live next to me, and I am Mark Long. Live at Independence...
I think I got the better end of the stick.
Yeah, you're a little more comfortable.
Ricky.
Ricky. Man.
Wait, is it because I'm next to Mark or Mark is next to me? What's wrong?
Yes.
We'll tell you when you're older. But we are actually in Ricky's office, so it might sound a little bit different than what you've been used to lately. We're just trying out different locations to make sure we get the best sound for you. Because it could be echoey or
it's all about the listeners.
That's right. It's all about your experience, and
we're willing to contort ourselves for you.
And you can tell us about your experience on the brand new Range Minded Facebook page. Just crossed the 100 likes mark a couple days ago. So you could join 100 other people that like us. Make sure you leave us.
You could be a charter member, right?
A charter member, an esteemed member of the Range Minded Facebook group. Give us a like. You'll get some fun posts throughout the week. Maybe some behind the scenes photos, teaser videos. A little bit of everything, and leave us some feedback too. Let us know how we're doing, and we're always taking episode suggestions as well, so don't forget about that.
We love them.
Yeah, or you can also just email us at podcast@iishooting.com as well, whichever is really easiest for you. So
right.
But today we're going to go back to basics, do a little education, talk about the 8 steps in the cycle of fire.
Cycle of operation, you mean?
Cycle of operations.
Fire? Did you say fire?
I did. I misspoke.
First, you rub the sticks together.
Oh, gee. I don't want to do that.
Okay.
I don't feel comfortable. Steve, I need an adult.
Hey, what's brown and sticky?
Oh, God, what?
A stick.
Dad joke number 1 out of the way already.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the 8 steps in the cycle of operations of a firearm. So we're going back to basics, like I said. Because there are 8 steps in the cycle of operation of a firearm, right, Ricky?
And the normal steps, and actually that translates into a lot of different weapons, actually.
Really?
I mean, even a catapult, if you think about it.
Sure.
Or a blow dart gun.
Fair enough. I'm sure Ricky's got a collection of blow dart guns.
Actually, I don't.
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Well, Ricky, why don't you go over the 8 steps? Can you name them all?
I can. So, actually, the listeners, if you guys out there want to get a pen and a paper, just pause the podcast. For real, I'm serious. This is important to write down.
I didn't know we had to take notes.
Yeah, you have to take notes. That's
required.
There'll
be a test.
At the end?
There will be a test. There is in my classes, so... But anyway...
And the winner of who gets the best score gets nothing but to listen to the podcast again.
You'll get satisfaction of knowing that you completed the podcast. Actually, we can give you a shout out on our Facebook page.
That's right. So we'll see if I can screw this up. But so the 8 steps of the cycle of operations and general cycle of operations is first feeding.
Very good. Yep.
Then chambering.
Ooh, yeah.
Then locking.
Yeah, look at him go.
And then firing.
Man.
Unlocking. Extracting.
Oh, I thought I was going to get him on that one.
ejecting,
Yeah.
cocking.
Very good. Ricky, are you reading those?
Nope.
No, I've got a list on my phone here, but Ricky doesn't have a list. He just did that right from memory.
That's right.
Attaboy.
He's impressed. I'm impressed. Ricky knows things.
That's right. Brush my shoulder off.
So tell me why it's important to know the steps in a cycle of operation.
So knowing the steps in the cycle of operations helps the user of the firearm understand what their firearm is doing. If the firearm were to have issues, they can identify which step in the cycle of operations that malfunction is happening, and then they can identify different components within that firearm that might be causing that malfunction.
Yeah, they can kind of self-diagnose the problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I mean, you can save yourself money in that, or you can just be a little bit more educated when you bring your firearm into the gunsmith.
Or it will cost you a lot of money. Yeah, you can either save money or cost you money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you could blow up your gun if you don't understand how these things work, and maybe you just keep pulling the trigger.
Yep.
So, also, I mean, that's where the term, failure to feed, failure to fire, failure to eject.
Extract.
If your failure to extract, if you've heard any of those terms, or those terms, but maybe don't know where they came from, it's from the cycle of operations. So, well, let's start at the beginning, which is feeding. I have a list because I don't have it memorized.
Okay.
But what's the first step in the cycle of operation?
So feeding. I mean, you think of a regular semi-automatic pistol. Your feeding process can start with you loading the magazine and inserting the magazine into the firearm. At that point, you are starting the first cycle of operation, right?
Right, and so in a revolver, it would be loading each cylinder. That would be feeding, right?
Yep. Or in a break-open shotgun, it would be you manually putting the cartridges into the chambers.
So this process... go ahead.
I was going to say, or if it's a crossbow, that's you putting the bolt in the crossbow.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so it really is applicable to many different weapons, not just firearms.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to know, like they're going to say, well, what about a pump action shotgun? What about a bolt action rifle? What about, you can go through all these whatabouts, but every single one of them is going to function on the same principles. Now, It is important to recognize the last three steps, which is extracting, ejecting, and cocking.
Wow, you're getting ahead of yourself.
That's right.
But
the last three steps you can flop those around a little bit. So they may not happen all in sequential order as listed, but usually they do.
Gotcha.
So, like on a Glock, the Glock doesn't actually finish its cocking, if you will, until you're actually pulling that trigger for the next round of fire.
Right.
That's when the cocking, so that's when the last step in the previous cycle of operations is actually finishing.
So things are almost happening simultaneously.
Yeah, but in a 1911, that firearm's already been cocked, that hammer's already been cocked to the rear by the time that round is feeding, and then definitely before it's chambered. Does that make sense?
Definitely. But that leads right into the next step. So feeding is just putting the ammunition into the gun, or into the gun, like you said, the magazine or whatever, and then it gets chambered.
And in a so chambering, so you have your feeding stops, your first cycle of operations, first step of the cycle of operations stops once the round is chambered, or it is chambering.
And Steve, what does that mean when it's chambered?
That means that the cartridge is fully inside the chamber of which houses the live cartridge.
And you could also call the chamber maybe the action as well?
No.
No, why not?
Because to me, the action would include the bolt or the bolt face, something like that. The chamber is the internal structure where the live cartridge is being housed until it gets fired.
There you go. The more you know.
So, and also another way to look at a firearm is just think of it as an internal combustion engine.
How does it relate to an engine?
So, getting into the mechanics of a vehicle, and granted, I'm not a mechanic,
But I play one on TV.
What's that?
But I play one on TV.
That's right. But you think of your pistons, right?
Yeah.
You have the gas is injected into the piston when the piston is in the most upright position,
right?
The topmost position. Gas is injected in there, and then you have air, and then you have a spark,
right?
That explodes and it pushes that piston down, and then that starts a cycle of operations.
Right.
The same thing happens in your gun. You get that spark, and everything starts with that. It's just an internal combustion engine.
All mechanics.
So
that's all it is in a gun, is just the mechanics of the parts moving together. So chambering, like you said, is when the cartridge is in the spot it needs to be, I guess, in layman's terms, because I keep going back to the crossbow where
so we can't mix that up. The chambering is not necessarily, it's in the chamber, but it has not reached full lockup yet. So locking is the third step.
Okay.
So it's not, the pistol is not locked. Every firearm that you have out there, you're going to have some sort of locking mechanism on it, or else it's a dangerous firearm.
Okay.
That being said, there are different...
It's a grenade.
Yeah, there are different... there's what we call blowback, which is what you would find in your .22 long rifle, things like that, which the pressures are not high enough to make that bolt or the pressure come back with a dangerous amount of force. Does that make sense? So just the weight of the bolt will time the gun just right. The weight of the slide in a .22 long rifle, just the weight of those things will time it just right for that bolt to come rearward and be able to start that cycle of operations over again.
So those bolts are certain masses and weights for certain reasons.
Yeah.
And then they're counterweighted by spring pressure sometimes.
Right, and those springs are certain tensions for certain reasons so everything functions just right.
So
quite geniusly, I might add.
We may be getting, like, people out there listening are like, holy cow, we're getting lost in the weeds, and this is a little bit more than I can handle.
But you should have expected that as soon as you started the podcast.
There is a good YouTube video that we will post on this podcast. I'll show Mark where to get it.
Sure will.
But it's actually 45 Snipers. That's the name of the channel on YouTube, and they do, you just type in how does a semi-automatic pistol work, and then click on the 45 Snipers video, and it's awesome. The quality of work that they do, it really points out everything of how a firearm functions.
It's all computer generated. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, isn't there cutaways and stuff too?
Cutaways, yeah, it cuts the gun away so you can see the internal workings of it.
Nice.
So
locking, Steve, can you repeat it for me?
Locking is the alignment of the lugs. As that bolt closes, it creates a seal. The lugs off the bolt create a lock. And it depends, because each gun is different. Right now I'm kind of just imagining a bolt action rifle. As you slide that bolt forward and you crank that handle down, there's lugs on that bolt face that lock in and seat into a specific place. Now if you're thinking like a Glock or maybe a 1911 is a better example. If you've ever noticed the grooves on the top of the hood of your 1911, those are your locking lugs. And as that slide moves forward, they marry into a specific section inside that slide, which locks.
Now, Steve just recently finished completing his own fitting. Not completed yet.
The gun's not done yet, but
it's just the painting, though. The functionality is good. So a 1911, talk a little bit about how important is that locking surface during the fitting process?
Well, you can undergas your gun if you don't have it right, or it'll fire out of battery, which is far worse than anything else. That would be a bad day, especially on something you're spending hours and hours and hours on.
And so what do you mean by out of battery?
So if battery, I guess we could define the term battery means that the gun or the firearm, let's put it that way, because it may not be a gun. It could be a cannon for that matter. Battery would be when it's a fully locked position and it's ready to fire in its safest form. Okay, that's probably the easiest way for me to put that out there. So if on your 1911, going back to that 1911 scenario, if your lugs aren't fit properly, that's not going to be tight to the bolt face. You're going to have outgassing, under pressures, or fragging outside of the chamber.
That's bad news.
That's bad news.
And so that's why locking is so important. That's also why when you're building an AR, head spacing and all that is important, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Can you talk about that?
The nice thing with the ARs, if we're gonna, maybe Ricky was already gonna touch on this. Modern components are so easy to build an AR. Like a lot of stuff you don't have to worry about because it's done.
Right.
But if you're doing a bolt gun or precision rifle, something like that, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I have a friend who from back home in Illinois who just got turned on to the podcast, and he was telling me he was building he built a FAL.
Cool.
And over the summer, and he's like, yeah, one of the head spacing was one of the toughest parts. So just to make sure everything was fitting right and all that jazz. So
and AKs are the same way, getting those barrels pressed into the right place. Otherwise, it could turn into a catastrophic failure. It's precise.
And by catastrophic, he means it'll blow up in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen a gun blow up in somebody's hands?
Oh yeah,
I have.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's happened actually a couple of times here on the range, but usually you deal with that with hand loaders, people that are reloading their own cartridges. And
Yeah, the one I'm thinking of was a brand new 365. Were you there that day, Ricky?
I don't know. I was there for the Glock.
Yeah, there was a 365, brand new gun. They haven't shot very many times.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know if it was factory reloads or a reputable reloader. And I say that with air quotes, but the gun blew up in his hand.
Man, can you imagine
Brand new gun.
I mean,
I'd be so angry.
There's no way you can get another one after that. I mean, like the warranty. There's no warranty on that, is there? Especially if you're shooting reloaded ammo or whatever.
No, that's specifically in the manual. You can't. Yeah, they won't cover it.
Yep, every firearm manufacturer says that. Factory loads only.
It is interesting seeing, and I know we're kind of going away from the cycle of operations a little bit, but that always happens in these podcasts. So, but it is interesting watching those videos of these guns malfunctioning or blowing up, catastrophic failures, and how the gun is designed. Modern guns, I should say, are designed to accept that to a certain limit.
Really?
So with a Glock, the internal guts will come out of the mag well. Does that make sense? So it's shooting you down. It's shooting the majority of the gases down and away from the shooter.
Did not know that.
Most magazine-fed rifles are designed that way to pressure down from the chamber down the magazine and out the bottom.
Did not know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's good to know.
And so the first time I saw one blow up, it was cool to see the Glock actually doing that. So that guy, I mean, that gun blew up.
Oh,
but that guy had a little bit of a cut on his finger. That's all it was.
I remember who you're talking about. I was there that day.
Because I always think whenever you hear about somebody's gun blowing up, like the slide literally blows in two or gets shot behind you, or
it will definitely.
I've seen that happen.
Pins will get sheared off, and the slide may bulge, the barrel may bulge, and it depends also on the malfunction. If you have a squib load, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but if you have a squib load, it may malfunction a little bit differently, or the catastrophic failure may be a little bit different than a hot load.
Yeah, that's true.
Like that.
It depends on where you are on the cycle of operations.
Yeah, and so let's get back to the cycle of operations. Number 4 is the fun one. What's number 4, Steve?
Firing.
And what is... It sounds simple, and it really is, but it's kind of a couple of complex things depending on if you have a striker-fired gun or, there's multiple things going on at once, really.
Yeah, there can be some complicated parts to the firing mechanism, but what it boils down to is as you press that trigger, there's some things that get released, whether it be spring pressure or whatever, causes the hammer or striker to fall and hit the propellant on the back of the cartridge, igniting the powder and so forth. And throwing lead downrange, right?
Yep. And the bullet follows the path of least resistance. Now, this is a good thing that people usually they can't answer me. You get a few people in the classes that can. So, say that I was to put a cartridge just on a desk in front of me, and I could make that just go off with just by looking at it, or I point my finger and it goes off.
Ricky's got telekinesis.
It's not in a barrel. Yeah, that's pyrokinesis.
No, that'd be if you just set it on fire.
Oh, okay.
God, nerds.
Okay. But yeah, it's just sitting right on the desk in front of me. Where is that bullet going to go?
Could be anywhere.
Could be
Do
anywhere.
most people say up?
Most people say it'll shoot through the ceiling. That's what...
It'd probably just go out. Like, it would explode out, like, everywhere.
Yeah, it's just like saying, what would you do if, like a firecracker do if you set it on your desk and lit it off?
It would explode out everywhere.
Where would it go? Yeah.
Because so what Ricky means, I'm guessing by the path of least resistance, is the gun is actually designed so the travel out of the barrel is the path of least resistance.
Yep. So when you think, and you were talking about a chamber, what is a chamber in our head spacing? So let's talk a little bit about that. When you're in a chamber, the chamber is a mirror image of the actual casing of the casing of the cartridge.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Depending on the tolerances that you have, it may be tighter, it may be looser inside there, but it's like a hand in a glove, basically. And that's why the cartridge, you could just drop a cartridge into a barrel. If it's the appropriate caliber, it won't just fall through the barrel, it'll stop there.
It gets seated.
Yeah, it gets seated. So when you are chambering or cutting the chamber in a barrel, you actually are using a chamber reamer to cut that specific shape in that barrel. So you look at I think it's beautiful, but if you look at a actual rifle cartridge, the chamber looks exactly like that rifle cartridge, only, I mean, obviously mirror image opposite
right.
of what that is. And it's very, very pretty. It's very shiny, or it should be shiny on the inside. And so that's the chambering. Now the head spacing, what you're looking at is to make sure that cartridge is not seated either too far or too little. Does that make sense? You want it needs to be, there's a specific distance that cartridge needs to fit inside of the barrel.
Right.
That's head spacing. Okay. Inside of the
and
barrel
you can get into
in relation.
a huge discussion about exactly where that bullet needs to be, as far as distance from the casing, if it's going to touch the lands and grooves.
Yep.
I guess the lands, not the grooves.
And that's when you get into reloading. There's a big school of thought for on either side.
Oh, because you can seat the bullet into the cartridge differently, and that'll change your head spacing, right?
So you can make it. No, it won't change the head spacing.
Accuracy.
It won't change the head spacing, but because the head spacing is shouldered off of the casing, not the bullet.
Oh, okay.
So the projectile, though, some reloaders they like their bullet to be seated a little further forward so that it catches on the rifling. So there's not as much of a jump. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To get to the rifling.
Right.
And accuracy, they think that it's a lot more true. Now some people say, well, that jump is good, so there's different schools of thought.
Maybe for velocity or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm not a reloader, so I can't really get into that too much.
And it's also interesting to note, I guess, while I was thinking about it, that not only does the projectile follow the path of least resistance, but so can the casing, because the casing will stretch under the amount of immense amount of heat that's created inside the pressure there, inside the chamber. Yeah,
so that's important. So usually at this time, I start talking to people about the materials in casings.
Well, because most casing that you get from the factory is brass, but there is aluminum casing and there's also steel case, right?
And nickel.
And
actually they make polymer too, and I haven't shot a polymer.
Yeah, those poly case. And ARM up there in Horseshoe Bend.
Yeah.
They make they use the shell shock, which is it's an aluminum base, but it's a composite cylinder wall or casing wall.
What by composite? What do you mean? What materials?
I don't know for sure. It's nickel and something else, but it doesn't expand.
Oh, yeah, I know it looks different.
Yeah, that's American Reserve Munitions, I think, right? Mm-hmm. It's about 45 minutes north of here, of Boise. So, Again, another wonderful local firearms dealer, manufacturer, or ammunition manufacturer.
Ammunition manufacturer.
Ammunition manufacturer, but in the firearms world.
And I'm going to throw another plug at them. They make some of the best, super incredibly efficient rifle rounds out there.
Really?
Absolutely. That new Predator round is pretty amazing.
You know, they'd probably also be a fantastic sponsor of Range Minded.
We might have to call them.
Yeah. Well, you can be the sponsor forever. Just send us free ammo.
Yep, that's right.
But like, in all honesty, if you guys are into precision shooting, you need to look at their Predator round. It is amazing.
Nice.
Super flat shooting.
Well, very cool. Yeah, so the ammo really does make a difference too in the shooting, and
in the cycle of
operation. So,
and how your gun may malfunction. So, this is really quick. While we're talking, since we're on the topic of chamber, let's go over those different qualities of metal that you can have, or I guess material you can have for the casing. You have at the top level, you have nickel and brass. Okay. Nickel you usually find in your higher end
defensive loads,
but there is no significant advantage. Nickel is prettier and it's shiny.
It's silver.
It
looks cool
instead of brass, but it is still good to use either nickel. And you'll know the difference between nickel and aluminum, because nickel is very, very shiny. Aluminum has more of a matte finish. It's silver too.
Right. And
you can reload. Honestly, you can reload either or, but nickel you can reload for sure.
Yep. Yeah, and then you have nickel and this is my list of how I would use different materials. Yeah, classify them. But then you have nickel. I would stay away from nickel if I could. If it were the only thing left, I would be fine with shooting nickel. Or not nickel, I'm sorry, aluminum. I keep saying nickel.
I was going to say, yeah, I'd shoot nickel, absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
aluminum.
Try to stay away from aluminum cartridges if you can. It's not the end of the world if you have to shoot them. But
it might be the end of the world.
It might be the end of the world, yeah. So the thing you have to think about when you're looking at a chamber, the steel on a barrel is actually pretty mild steel, which means it's soft in terms. It's more soft in terms of steel than other parts of the firearm. And then at the bottom of the list, and I haven't shot polymer, so I won't even talk about those. But at the bottom of the list is definitely steel. Stay away from steel at all costs.
Why?
Because there's several different reasons. The steel on the cartridge is usually harder than the steel that's what's in the barrel.
So it's going to rough up your barrel and wear it out a lot faster.
As you're smacking that cartridge in there, you're just deforming your chamber.
Because like you said, the cartridge follows the path of least resistance, so it'll expand and it'll push against that barrel steel, right? It's
just the act. You think of a semi-automatic pistol. That's putting those rounds in there pretty quick, or an AR-15, and with a lot of force.
The bolt is pushing the round up into the chamber. Yeah.
Yep. So usually, also when you have a steel cartridge, steel casing, you also have a steel cord projectile.
Instead of lead?
Yeah, as a thin layer of copper around it, so you think it's a copper. But
or sometimes zinc.
Or zinc, yeah. So you actually have that hardened core that's traveling down your barrel and just eating your rifling up.
Interesting.
Another issue, and a way that you can tell it's steel, is actually steel will usually look brown. The reason that happens is because they have to prevent it from rusting, and they do that with the use of lacquer.
So they put lacquer on.
Yep.
Really?
To protect, keep the casings from rusting. So you imagine that heating it up, especially in an AR, it gets super hot if you're just dumping rounds.
Wouldn't that cook off some of the rounds?
No, maybe. I don't think you'll be able to get you'd have to get it pretty hot to cook a round off, but you're leaving deposits of lacquer inside that chamber little by little, and then you're going to induce a malfunction at some point.
Yeah, at some point it's going to, and I've been on the other side of trying to clean this crap up when after it, people shoot 1 million rounds of Wolf ammo through their gun, and it's just, unless you heat that gun back up to try to melt that lacquer out of there, it doesn't want to come out.
Huh, didn't know that.
Same thing with WD-40. Never use WD-40 on your guns, please.
So that means
it is not a lubricant.
That means more than likely the brown colored 7.62 by 5.4R.
54R, yeah, that is definitely lacquered.
Yep. That's lacquered Mosin Nagant ammo.
A lot of that ammo is going to be, and it's usually cheaper, so that's why people get it.
Yeah.
I highly doubt you're going to heat up your Nagant so much that it's going to do that, though.
You don't know me. No, I haven't shot that thing in a long time.
I would really like to see you dump a bunch of rounds out of that gun.
Yeah,
it hurts.
It's fun. I just haven't shot it in a while, but that answers that question.
I haven't shot it for a long. Well, that's because I lost it in a boating accident. But yeah, they're fun guns.
It's made of wood. It floats.
Oh, is that how it is?
Yeah. So it's probably just floating there somewhere.
Plastic
other than
guns,
the
wood guns.
No, but I now that answers that question because I never knew why it was brown. I thought it might have just been old or crappy or whatever. So good to know. But yeah,
the other thing is that lacquer acts as a preservative too for the primer. It seals off, makes almost like a watertight seal at the primer location inside the primer pocket as well as in the bullet, the seat there too. So it's great for hanging on to for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that I have is more than likely decades old. It came in a sealed, Soviet green tin. I'm sure you've seen them before. Yeah, Spam can.
Nice.
Now, with all this said about steel, Hornady is making some steel cartridges now.
I've used that, and I've been pleasantly surprised with it.
Jeff, our gunsmith, who is a fantastic gunsmith, he says they're good rounds. So I don't know what the science is behind the Hornady versus Wolf or this Red Army stuff.
And it might be a different composite. The other thing with some of the older Russian stuff, which I doubt too many people shoot anymore, is the acidity of the powder. It's corrosive, right?
Oh, yeah, and it can eat your barrel up.
And so I don't think, because, there's been a huge slowdown, basically a stop to all importation of Russian ammo anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know unless somebody's got some stored somewhere way back when. The other thing with using steel, not only is it hard on the chamber, but it's hard on your extractor.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, because it's gripping on, and we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. But because actually the next step is the unlocking, which we talked about the locking of the bolt onto the chamber, correct? Mm-hmm. And so after firing, then that bolt becomes unlocked.
Yep. So imagine that bolt rifle again. You're pulling that bolt up and removing it to the rear.
Yep.
And that's pretty much that simple.
It's simple. So when I was talking about the blowback system, like a 22 long rifle, it's just the weight of the gun or the bolt, the weight of the slide. But in a higher pressure center fire cartridge, you're going to need to lock that. So that's what Steve is talking about. So pretty simple, straightforward. You can get a lot more in the nitty gritty and start talking about locking blocks and stuff like that. But that's a different class.
There's so many different actions. It's hard to go through, but the operations are generalized and they follow every firearm.
They follow the same logical steps. Because I was going to ask about like open bolt guns or from firing from an open bolt or whatever.
Open bolt versus closed bolt, but you're still following the same principles.
You are, but
you're just doing it at different time. Well, the trigger pull.
Rates.
So if people out there that don't know the difference between a closed bolt and an open bolt, basically the whole theory behind an open bolt is the bolt stays to the rear until the trigger is pulled, so that keeps the barrel free from the bolt being right up against it, and it relieves heat, so it cools the barrel down and all the action. So for like these machine guns that are having 1 million rounds pumped through them, they can cool down.
Right.
And it's very quick.
Yeah.
Very fast. Yeah, a lot of machine guns, or like our M249 fires from an open bolt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so does the 1919?
No, 1919 is closed bolt.
Oh, well, there you go.
So.
But Uzis and MAC-10s and MP5s.
I think Stens do too. Yeah, there's all kinds of guns throughout history that do that. So that's unlocking. The next one is extraction. Do you need to answer that?
No.
Ricky got a phone call on his smartphone.
Don't worry, Ricky. We'll wait for you.
Yeah, I know.
Go ahead and take that phone call. It's okay.
I'll turn it off. Okay. Just a little bit of sound effects for the podcast.
So after unlocking,
we just got millions of listeners waiting for that phone call to be done, Ricky. It's okay.
Everybody's gonna wonder who the hell was that.
It was my wife.
Oh well, he just ruined it. So that was unlocking. So then we go to extraction, which is another fun one, because that is removing the spent cartridge from the chamber and getting it out of the action, right?
Mm-hmm. So you think of the extractor, just think of a claw. All it is a claw that slips over the rim of the cartridge and yanks it out of the chamber.
And that's why there's a rim on the cartridge, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that little lip on the end of it, that's your extractor latches onto that usually when the bolt is locked, right?
Yeah. So when the slide, there's a couple different ways that cartridges can come up underneath the extractor. Either during the feeding process, the rim can slide underneath, or the extractor can just pop up over the top of it.
Right.
The extractor is usually spring loaded. So
yes. So if you think about the extraction process on a break action shotgun is totally different than it would be on an AR-15.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because a break action shotgun,
the mechanics of it's different, but it's still going to happen.
Yeah. And in some cases it might be, it would be manual. In a break action shotgun, you have to extract them out yourself, don't you?
No.
Usually depends on how old the shotgun is.
Yeah, it depends. Usually on a shotgun they have these little levers that they look like they're part of the barrel.
Oh, okay.
And then when you break it open, it's just a little shelf that kind of moves. Mm-hmm. And depending on how fancy the break open is, those ones will also eject the cartridges.
Gotcha. Well,
they may just extract them.
Well, on a revolver, though, you have to extract them yourself. That's why there's an extractor rod.
You have the extractor rod.
Right.
That's the extractor.
You have to move
Unless
that.
you look at that baby Russian out there in the used counter, and that's totally different.
Oh, what do we got out there?
The baby Russian.
I have no idea what that is.
Built in 1874, I think, is when that manufacture date was.
Oh, wow.
Have Ricky show it to you.
I will. That'd be fun.
I can't remember how that one extracts.
But I think, it's funny because there's a surprising amount of people who don't know that extractor rod actually does push back and it, and extracts
and they just try to dump
rounds.
it out.
Yeah. I learned that. Like, I knew that at one point, but it took me, I didn't know that like when I started shooting. So that had to be shown to me, and I've shown a couple people about that too. So
it sure is handy.
It really is. Yeah, there's smart people that make these firearms. So I got a little bit ahead of myself because extraction is just getting the spent chamber getting the spent cartridge out of the chamber.
Yes.
But then that's extraction, but then ejection is actually getting it out of the action. So I combined two steps.
That's what actually flips it out of the gun or drops it to the ground.
Right. Well, and so, I think what a lot of people see, like in most with semi-autos and centerfire, semi-automatic rifles and stuff, is they see the rounds flying out. Mm-hmm. And what causes that?
And that would be your extractor in combination with your ejector.
So why do
they work hand in hand with each other?
So why does it come out sometimes so violently? Like with my AK, like it just spits rounds out.
How fast does your bolt come back on your AK?
It's the force of the bolt.
Pretty fast.
Okay, so that casing is going the same speed as your bolt as it comes out of as it pulls out of the locking and going to extracting and ejection. So that's how fast they come out of there, is as fast as that bolt moves. And with your AK, it hits a rod, and once that hits that ejection rod, and then it throws them out to the side.
Now, and there is different. So, like you think of the AK, or a semi-automatic pistol like the Glock, which has a bar in it too. But you also have the AR-15s where inside on the bolt face you have the extractor, and you also have the ejector, which is a spring-loaded plunger. Pushing, you have the extractor on one side of the cartridge, the rim of the cartridge, and on the opposite side you have the spring-loaded plunger, which is the ejector. And so it's trying to flip that cartridge out, that casing, but it can't do so until it gets to the ejection port, and that's when it's free to flip that out.
That's when the spring actuates to flip it out.
It's actuating the whole time. But it's just hitting the side of the receiver.
It has an avenue out.
Gotcha. Yep. Path of least resistance.
Yep. It waits until it has an opening, and then it'll flip it out.
That's why there's a little ridge on most uppers of brass deflector, because then the brass will hit that, and then instead of coming back and maybe hitting you in the face, it'll bounce off to the side.
Yeah, and if you look at it,
I've never had a problem with that ever.
Yeah. Well, if you're a lefty, you do, but I don't shoot guns left. I don't shoot long guns lefty, so
I guess that's true.
But I mean, you could probably still get hit in the face. I mean, with an AK, I mean, you could still get hit in the face.
Yeah.
So, and aren't there some guns that eject up? Or no?
Yeah, depends on the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it also depends on the shape. The front bevel you would have, like on a you can change the trajectory of how a spent casing is ejected out of your gun, like a semi-automatic pistol, just by changing the face of the ejector.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? It'll deflect it in different paths.
Right. Interesting.
So a gunsmith can, if somebody's having a problem with the casings always going down the back of their shirt, and they hate that, and they want to get it ejected out a different direction, follow a different path, a gunsmith can go and reshape the front side of the ejector and change the trajectory.
Or instead of taking it to a gunsmith, they can just get fed up and just give the gun to me.
That's right.
You don't want that gun anymore. I'll take it. It won't hurt me. And isn't there a gun that ejects downward and outward?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
So you have the Kel-Tec RDB, which drops it straight down.
Yeah, because it doesn't necessarily have to go up or over. It can go down.
They also have the RFB, which ejects it forward.
Really?
It's kind of cool.
And then, like on the Tavor, you can actually switch, I think, which way it ejects out, right?
Left or right side. Yeah. Or you can have, like Jeff makes left and right-handed ARs, so they can eject left or right side.
There you go. Yeah, because I know they make left-handed ARs, so you don't get blasted in the face. But and then I think, speaking of Kel-Tec, the KSG, I think that ejects downward.
Down. Yep.
Yeah. So because like most pump-action shotguns, they'll eject, to the right. Or wherever.
And so does the P90.
That was my other one. Yeah, it ejects downward, right?
Yep.
So a lot of different ways that you can get rid of that empty cartridge, because you need to get rid of that empty cartridge so you can move on to the next step, which is cocking.
Well, you need to get rid of it because you need that chamber free for the next round.
Right. I tried and failed on the last step.
Cocking doesn't necessarily have to do with any of that.
That's true. That actually happens most of the time at the back of the gun, right?
Yep.
So after eject, we've got our cartridge ejected, and now cocking happens, right?
So that can happen in any... Cocking has to happen. Let me just put it that way.
It's the quote of the podcast right there.
Yeah. Well, and it has to. It can happen. You mentioned it in the beginning. It can happen in various parts of that cycle of operation.
Yeah.
Right, because it could happen after the feeding, but it has to happen in order for the next round to be able to be ready to be fired.
The cocking could start start at the same time as the extracting and not finish until all the other steps are over, or like I talked about in the Glock, your cocking doesn't actually finish until you're pulling the trigger on the next round.
Right.
So it's still the true last step, but you're already started in the next cycle of operations before that last cycle of operations is completed.
They kind of bleed over into each other.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me, just what is like a definition of cocking then?
Cocking would just be bringing the firing mechanism, the firing mechanics, or what I would call the action, bringing all the components together to to function as needed to fire off another round, basically. All the components, it just depends on what gun you're looking at. You're going to have, the components are going to look different.
Basically, it's like the cocking of the hammer on a 1911, or like half cocked on a striker fired gun, or on like a bolt gun is, bringing that bolt all the way back and then moving it forward.
Now, an important term that everyone wonders what it is, and it's always thrown around, but you'll hear the word sear a lot. When you start getting into the gun world, people will be talking about the sear. It's important to know what the sear is. The sear will look different.
Does it forecast the future?
That's right, it does.
Oh, that's a sear.
Sear,
That's
yeah.
right.
You got your spelling mixed up.
A sear will look different depending on what firearm you're dealing with. But all a sear does is stops, I want to say, the forward motion of the firing mechanism. So a sear on a hammer-fired gun like a 1911, all that sear is doing is stopping that hammer from moving forward and striking the firing pin until the trigger is pressed. But you also, on a Glock, you have a sear. Now, the Glock doesn't have a hammer, but it has a striker. So the sear is actually engaging the striker directly. And the sear, when the trigger is pulled, the sear will drop down out of the way of the striker, allowing the striker to move forward and hit the hit the primer on the back of the cartridge.
And it uses spring pressure to force it forward.
Force it forward, yeah.
So basically, just think of the sear as the thing that stops the gun from shooting.
Right, but on an automatic weapon, that sear is like a fully automatic weapon.
On a full auto, you have different, like on an AR-15, you actually have two different sears. You have I should say an M4. You have a semi-automatic version of a sear, the semi-automatic sear, and then you have the full auto sear.
Is that why there's an extra pin up at the top in a full auto?
Yep, and that's what houses that.
It's pretty interesting how the mechanics work on a full auto sear.
Yeah, well, and then even more interesting, I would think, is like a 3-round burst or a certain thing.
Yeah,
because that's a sear is instrumental to that too. It I don't know exactly how it works, Ricky. You can probably tell me, but
actually, I haven't torn a 3-round burst apart. I've done the regular full auto, so you don't see many 3 rounds. We were supposed to get 3 of those in.
Oh, really?
I don't know what happened to those.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
That'd be a good time.
But I would be interested to tear them apart, because I've actually wondered that too. How do they time it to where after 3 rounds the sear engages?
I think it hit every round. Like, let's say you have a 3-round burst, like it hit the sear engages like a third of the way, or rotates a third of the way, or something like that. So
actually, speaking of which, I think 45 Snipers has a video exactly about that.
Oh, well, then we'll post that along with it. But that's it, and then we're back at the beginning. We're back at the feeding, and so that's like when the slide's all the way back, the slide comes forward, and the slide grabs a round out of the magazine, or when you bring that bolt forward on a bolt gun, that brings that bolt in in the magazine, or the clip.
Yep. So
because it could be a real clip.
Could be an M1.
Could be a grand, yeah.
So just going back through the cycle of operations, and quick version is feeding. You're starting to strip the round, or manually feed the round into the chamber. Once you're entering mostly into the chamber, and then that's what we call chambering.
Yep.
Okay. Then you have your locking. Then you have your firing. Okay, so firing pin comes forward and sets the round off. You have your unlocking. Then you have your extracting, ejecting, cocking.
And there you go.
And it starts all over again.
The reason why... How much time do we have?
We've got some time.
Okay. The reason why we want to know this stuff, because people out there might be, well, that's wonderful trivia, but it's not important for me to understand. It is important because your gun can have certain malfunctions that you don't understand what is happening.
Right, like a failure to feed, failure to fire, failure to extract or eject.
Yep. So give me... Let's talk about a hypothetical malfunction that we could have.
Okay.
Let's say I go to shoot the gun. I seat the magazine fully, rack the slide to the rear, and chamber around. And my gun is locked up. I'm ready for the fourth step in the cycle of operations. I go to pull the trigger, and all I hear is a click. Now, I'm not going to check the magazine. I'm not going to check the extractor. I'm not going to check the ejector, because we haven't gotten to that cycle of operations, that step, right? So there's certain components that I'm going to start wondering. Now, obviously, this isn't done when you guys are in a firefight. You're just going to rack the slide and get another round in there. But if you're really, truly diagnosing your firearm and what is happening to it, you can start using these steps. So if that were to happen to me, I might look at A, is there a round in the chamber?
Yeah.
If there's no round in the chamber, then our feeding was a problem.
We had a failure to feed.
We step back to the first step, right?
Right.
But if there's a round in the chamber, what am I looking at now? There's different components that might cause that issue. Does my firing pin protrude as much as it should? So then if it doesn't, I might check firing pin protrusion to see if it's long enough.
Well, and if you have like a lot of failures to feed, it might be you're having light strikes,
Well, failure to feed wouldn't be light strike.
No, that'd be a failure to fire.
Yeah.
So, see, I'm learning too.
So failure to fire, yep. So you have a lot of light strikes. So then you might look at, okay, well, is my gun dirty?
Yeah.
Or is my firing pin broken?
And see, that's why it's important to clean your gun every once in a while.
It's also it's also good to know, and Steve went over this, but the cycle of operations for a cartridge. So I might look at maybe the primer is seated in the cartridge too far, and the firing pin protrusion is good enough, but that primer is way too far forward, and it's not able to dimple that primer enough
to cause the primer
to rupture the foil.
Or even backwards. I've seen factory primers backwards.
Yeah, it's important to check your ammo. I mean, I've seen it online, where you have, or sometimes even no primer. I've seen online before.
More than once.
Yeah.
So no primer. You might have a hard primer. You might have
a weak striker spring or a weak firing spring.
Because those springs can wear out over time. So if you have an old gun, you might need to get those springs replaced.
Have bad powder. So you guys can see, like, me giving that hypothetical issue doesn't solve. It doesn't tell me what exactly is happening, but it does help me to start thinking about what components are supposed to function within that step that may not be doing their job.
And you can at least narrow down the problem rather than saying my gun won't fire.
Mm-hmm.
So learning about and knowing the different cycles or the different steps in the cycle of operations can help you kind of figure out what may be wrong with your firearm or any kind of malfunctions. That's like why we do malfunction drills in classes too. So you kind of look and see and learn what the deal is and how to remedy it.
And it'll make you a more effective shooter, honestly.
How so?
It's because you'll be able to understand your gun better. The tool that you're using, you'll know.
It's you'll
know it better.
It's very important to know. It's like driving down a car or down the road in a car that you have done something to the motor.
Yeah.
So you kind of know what is going on inside that engine. And so when you start to
put gas in it?
Yeah, that's right. But when you start getting that squealing noise, that might be the idler pulley or the belt.
Right.
Might need a change, something like that.
Yeah, it's good to know those things.
Yeah.
So
you need to get out to the range, though, so we've got to close this up.
Yeah, well, Ricky's closing an episode up, but yeah, I do. So that is the cycle of operations in a firearm. Hopefully you've learned a little bit. We'll post some videos up with this as well. If you have any questions about it, you can ask Ricky. He went to gunsmithing school. Steve and I didn't.
Nope.
But you can shoot us an email, podcast@iishooting.com, or you can message us on Facebook, Range Minded Podcast, and we'll help you out. But thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Study the video that we're going to post.
And there's a test.
And write all this stuff down and study it in your dreams, too.
Oh, geez.
Osmosis.
All right. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Okay, see you guys.
Thanks for listening to Range Minded. Find us online at Range Minded Podcast on Facebook. or send us an email at podcast@iishooting.com. We're always happy to get feedback, episode suggestions, whatever you want to send us, really. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and pretty much wherever else you get your podcasts from. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.